everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet everyone, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron's Master Class. I see the professor is walking up to the podium. So, take a seat, get comfortable. The class is ready to begin.
And merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron's Master Class. The teacher this week is Monica Bodirsky, who's launching an online, or the Obsidian Academy of Esoteric Arts, coming up in the fall. She's an artist and author, magic practitioner whose specialty is divination. Her innovative art and writing empowers people by inviting them to explore the unknown, where deep connections to self, ancestral wisdom, and spirits of the land are cultivated. She's also the creator of an innovative tarot decks, and if you'd like to hear about some of them, I've got 3 of her previous shows up on my YouTube channel, Stirring the Cauldron Para-X, so you can go get a listen if you haven't had it already. Okay, questions and answers from the chat room are welcome, and if you'd like to join in, come over to paraxradionetwork.com. So get your notebooks ready, and welcome, Monica.
Well, thank you very much, Marla. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am so happy to start this particular masterclass because we're already cruising into autumn. We certainly are here where I live. It's already getting quite cool. So thank you very much again for inviting me to share a few things about witchcraft and mystical practices.
Yeah, and I want to hear a little bit more about the, give us an introduction actually of the Obsidian Academy. I mean, a little backstory and where does it come from, and we know it's going to be open, in October, right?
Actually, yeah, towards the end of September, and Obsidian is a brand new online Academy of Esoteric Arts that I'm beginning, like I said, at the beginning, end of September, beginning of October. We have 2 sessions in the fall, and those sessions consist of 4 to 5 weekly classes that will go from 7:30 until about 9 o'clock Eastern Time. And it is strictly an online academy for now. I realized that after doing Witchfest North and having a lot of live craft shows and the Witches Ball and everything, well, that kind of got yanked aside with the pandemic. But the good thing that came out of the pandemic was our ability to connect with international students and speakers. So that kind of morphed into this academy. I chose the name Obsidian because, well, it is one of my absolute all-time favorite crystals, which interestingly isn't actually a crystal. There is no crystalline structure. It's technically glass. And it's the first stone I had when I was very young, and it was just wonderful. So that is the name, and it's to explore things that I think perhaps are very obscure by a lot of standards, and I'm inviting so many wonderful guest speakers and sessional faculty from all different walks of life, different practices, specialties, covering everything from divination to puppet making and Kipper cards, which is quite different, and other things, dragon magic. There's just so many different things. There will be 3 sessions at least, if not 4, and they're seasonal. So we're talking about fall, winter, and then spring, and the Awakening residency in the summer. So that's just a little bit about Obsidian.
That's great. It sounds really nice. And so what's the class entail tonight?
Tonight's class, I'm going to share a little bit about my own journey of magic and sort of offer, I think, a starting point for people and just a few tips that I've picked up along the way. I'm sure many people are familiar with these. I've put them in sequence to help people sort through the vast amounts of information and misinformation out there right now because it's become quite popular. And I'm going to offer a few examples of things, suggestions, and ask people to jot down a few notes. I'll pause for a minute or two to ask a couple of questions. And of course, everyone's welcome to put their questions in the chat as well as we go. I'm quite used to pausing and answering those, teaching online, so I'm very comfortable with that. And hopefully this will help you avoid some of the pitfalls that you might encounter out there when you're starting your practice. But honestly, for those who are already practicing, you may have hit a few speed bumps, and I'd like to assist with the, I don't want to be too specific to date myself, but we'll just say many decades of my own practice.
Okay, I really got a smile on my face now. Misery loves company. All right, I'm going to step back, and when questions come in, I will give them to you, and otherwise I'll talk to you before the break.
Okay, thank you very much, Marla. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this master class. My name is Monica Bodirsky, and I'm coming to you from Takaranto, also known as Toronto. That is an indigenous word for Toronto, and I am on the sacred and sovereign lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the many, many other local indigenous people who've lived here and who continue to live here for at least the last 11,000 years, although more recently there have been some anthropological thoughts that perhaps the indigenous people of North and Central and Latin America, South America, have actually occupied these lands pre-glacial retreats, so up to potentially 100,000 years. Pretty startling when you think about it. I always start everything I teach with a land acknowledgement, not for any reason other than I promised that I would share that information while working at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto. I was designated as a story keeper many years ago, and I think I was given such sacred information that it is the least I can do. So welcome. And as an earth-based practitioner, also, I think it's very important to acknowledge the land spirits and the original people of the land, of course. So yes, welcome to this class. I hope you have a pen and paper. I'm going to start by sharing just a little bit about myself, just to give you a little context. And then I'm going to start right into information that I found helpful. And I'll pause now and then to ask you a question or two and have you jot those down. So where to begin? Yeah, well, it's always tricky to know where to begin. I think I was a very intuitive child with vivid dreams and witnessed many strange phenomena in the house. Apparently our gifts run in the family, and my grandmother was a medium but kept that information quiet. They were healers who used herbs and read cards, but in religious European towns and cities where they grew up, it was best to not advertise that particular thing and just to let people come to them for advice. Or when they did pass on messages to people, they explained their rather stunning and I'm sure unnerving accuracy as simply it being a hunch or just a gut feeling that they had. No Long Island medium-like activity or messages would have been particularly wise at that time. So I learned to use my gifts in a respectful way so as not to pry into the thoughts of others. I was told that just because you may be picking up on how others are thinking or feeling it, it is quite rude to just sort of blurt out what somebody else is thinking. You know, they didn't invite you in to sit down and have coffee there. So it took me a while because often we're led to believe that those gifts were kind of at the mercy of them, and they just are something that come and go and are a complete mystery. Well, yeah, they are quite mysterious, and I'm certainly not intimating that I know everything about how to control these gifts. However, I have learned, I think at the very least, how to change those energetic boundaries so that I'm not intruding on others, and also as a protection for my empathy, because I bet a lot of you are quite empathetic too, and it can get into overwhelm really quickly and easily, and we get peopled out pretty quickly. I think my interest very specifically in the paranormal and witches started at about the age of 9 or 10. Like most kids, I dressed up as a witch at Halloween and watched the movies. Never thought they were evil, just kind of chuckled. I think I was probably one of the only kids who didn't find Margaret Hamilton frightening in The Wizard of Oz. Not that I'm wicked, I just thought underneath that crusty surface was probably just a lonely lady, despite being green. So I also grew up quite a long time ago, as I alluded to earlier, and there was nothing more than there were a few books maybe published by witches and occultists. There were hardly any available, and yes, this was pre-internet, but post-motor vehicle. I'm not that old. The one book I remember, though I don't recall the author, unfortunately, it was a book by a woman and a witch. She compiled this very thick, and I would guess now about 300 to 400 page hardcover book with a black canvas kind of, or, cloth cover. And she had compiled chapters covering ESP, ghosts, psychic phenomena, witchcraft spells, magic squares, and occult sigils, and all sorts of things like that. And that's how she defined witchcraft. So I think that was my early definition, that you knew about all of these things. Now, my definition has shifted, of course, over time, but that was my introduction. I was also gifted a tarot deck by a friend when I was 10. It wasn't out of any great love. It was simply she didn't want it, and she kind of tossed it my way. And I very quickly said, yes, please. I took to that immediately, even though it was a very poor knockoff of a what we would refer to now as a Waite-Smith deck. Then it was called a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the most common, I think, tarot there is. And I learned to read very quickly by buying Arthur Edward Waite's book on tarot and Eden Gray's book. Those are two names, if you're interested in tarot and a little bit of the history, you might want to look up Arthur Edward Waite and Eden Gray. They aren't difficult now to Google. My goodness, things have changed for the better. I just found so many more resources in the world's largest online libraries. I was so thrilled as soon as I was right there when computers started up. And as I grew older, I learned to find all of these different traditions and systems and origins of magic. To name a few traditions, if you're not familiar, there is the Cabot tradition from Laurie Cabot. There is Alexandrian Wicca from Alex Sanders, and Gardnerian Wicca from Gerald Gardner. Some people practice stregoria. Are two different types. One is from Italy, and one is a very contemporary Italian-American practice, which is quite different. And there is all sorts of heathenry from Germanic, Norse, and Slavic cultures as well. And there are the many indigenous cultures around the world who practice local spiritualism. There's eclectic Wicca and witchcraft, which kind of draws upon whatever you're comfortable with. I think a lot of people land there because they aren't quite sure how to get into specific traditions. And there's also chaos magic, and that's a really interesting one because it kind of became popular in the 1970s, and it's kind of considered, I don't know, the punk rock of practices. It started to become popular, and Austin Osman Spare is the original occultist and artist from Britain who kind of came up with these ideas. They're very fascinating. And it is more about sympathetic magic, I suppose, and the belief system. So what you believe is what you manifest, which I think is kind of incorporated into a lot of magical practices now. So, interestingly, folklore and fairy tales, if you've ever read those, I'm sure many of you have, they have a lot to do with early pagan beliefs, including, dwarves, fairies, sylphs, and those magical creatures. Judeo-Christian alchemy and magic is sort of at the root of occultism, as opposed to perhaps the herbalism and folk magic of, that nice lady who lives in the woods. Also, what I find interesting is that alchemy and magic is often referred to, they're called pseudosciences, astrology, planetary work, but knowing about these things is really vital. You don't have to memorize things, but you should be aware because they are so entrenched in all of our magical practices in North America and contemporary North American practices. I collect so many specialty books on divination, different cultural approaches to spirituality, shamanism. I think it's about familiarizing yourself, not to get overwhelmed again, and not to try to memorize things or land anywhere. That's a common issue too. People want to arrive, and I'll just say leave the door wide open until you learn enough about things to choose, and use critical thought. And I don't mean criticize. I mean your critical thought is making very well-informed decisions about what you'd like to practice. And reading firsthand from authors and practitioners is the best approach. There are a lot of condensed versions right now on YouTube and TikTok, but they are not only extremely condensed, but they're being given to you through the lens of the person that is talking about the book or the practice. And they are picking and choosing. It's just very subjective. And I always suggest to students to go to the source, to the original people. You may think some of the older folks are outdated, but actually there's a lot that has stood the test of time. And then there are more contemporary things that, I'm very happy they've been brought into practices because it's kind of a living, breathing entity. We could get into a huge discussion about authenticity and tradition, but I think that is up to you. I don't think something that is older is necessarily better, okay? Part of witchcraft has always been the ability to be flexible and to change with the times. And if you want the definition of tradition, it is passing on knowledge through generations, but that can be just three generations. So that's fairly contemporary if you think about it. It doesn't need to be really old. So I'm going to say, let's grab our pens. And I think because a lot of my practice, and this is really vital, has come from my heritage, and I only discovered that much later in life, by the way, but I encourage people to try to find their cultural heritage, regardless of how many generations you've been in North America or wherever you are, if that's not where your original people came from. If you are indigenous to wherever you are, that's very different. But for those of you who aren't, I want you to, well, all of you, grab your pens and think back about 3,000 years. That's a stretch, isn't it? It's pre-Christian. It's pre-major religion in the Christian realm. So if that is your background, where did your families originate? What country? What land? What was their likely home if you're not certain? So make a note, if you haven't already done so, to research the pagan practices of that time and place. So jot down where you think your ancestors came from, okay? Pre-major religion. Regardless of your religion. Every single major religion has had a pagan background before becoming an organized religion. All right, there is Jewish mysticism. There are the Sufis. For Muslims, there's so many different practices. Many people consider Hindu to be pagan because of all the different deities. Okay, so think back. Jot that down. If it's more than one country, that's fine. Jot down all the countries you think they came from. And please distinguish between, places like Scotland and Ireland and England for many just become the UK. But it is important to note that there are very different original practices in those places. And same with Germanic culture. North Germanic culture is very different than the southern portion or the eastern portion that borders on Slavic lands. Borders change dramatically. And same with Asian practices. They are not Asian. They may be very specific right down to a village. If you know those places or suspect, write that down. One of the things I've noticed is people try to find that one ancestor's name who was a witch. Well, that's not going to get you terribly far, I think, because anyone who was pagan was practicing what we would refer to as a form of witchery, even if in your particular culture that has a negative connotation. Herbalism, healing, watching the stars, having very prophetic dreams. This is something that happens in my family, and it was referred to as dreaming true. Those are things that we would consider part of witchcraft. Wanting to protect your home with a horseshoe, a lot of superstitions come from there. So you don't need to find Aunt Bessie, the tea leaf reading witch. You just need to think about the area and do a little research on the pre-organized religion of that area and what people's beliefs are. And for some of you who are fortunate enough to keep close ties to some of your relatives and ancestors who still know that there are 13 moons and who follow agricultural cycles with moon cycles, you won't have as difficult a time as a lot of people who come from European heritage. Okay? Okay. So if you've jotted that down, let's move on a little. Let's do a little self-assessment here. Where to start? Enthusiasm and interest first and foremost. If you aren't really curious and you don't have the desire, honestly, the passion to find out whatever you can about magical practices, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. because a lot of this has to be very self-motivated. You just need that, okay? If you're trying to look for a place that's just going to give you all the answers, it's going to be tough. Yes, I'm saying that as an educator who's offering classes and who wants to give you answers. But I can say that I've had students who think that they'll just find out absolutely everything they need to know without doing research. And this is a big stumbling block, okay? So if you think it's just a hobby or you're just curious and you don't want to be a practitioner, that's great. There is nothing wrong about that, all right? But if you really want to be serious about practicing magic or witchcraft or any kind of occultism, you really do need that kind of enthusiasm, all right? So, again, pen in hand, if I were to ask you how you would rate your enthusiasm for witchcraft and occult studies on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being meh, and 10 being through the roof, where would you put yourself, okay? What number would you give yourself? And be honest, no one has to know about it or read it. I'd also like you, after you've written down that number, I want you just really quickly, single words, bullet points, just a couple. What excites you or interests you the most about this area? Could be anything. Could be divination. Could be ghosts, paranormal. It's interesting how much this encompasses. It is such a vast area. Okay, have you written down a couple things? Great. Now we're going to move on to knowing your strengths and challenges. This is also really critical. You should start your journey of learning, and this is true for any kind of learning. You should try very hard to be honest and aware of your strengths and challenges, okay? This will give you time to research what and who's out there, and I would suggest you do this before looking for a group or a coven. Know yourself first, and you're less likely to be influenced beyond your comfort zone, okay? And I'm not talking about being taught. Yes, community is great for teaching, but know your boundaries and your comforts, okay? So let's take a moment, and I mention this a fair bit, not to frighten people, but unfortunately in this realm, there is a lot of cult-like activity you don't want to fall into, okay? So research those who have come before. Let's take a quick moment to jot down something you would consider one of your greatest strengths, okay? Anything that you would consider one of your greatest strengths. This doesn't have to be anything to do with metaphysical, just in general. I'm just coming up to you and going, hey, how are you? What do you think your greatest strength is? Something you find very challenging is the second thing you will write down. Okay? All right, I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Or maybe a few seconds.
Well, we're going to have to do a break in about 2 minutes. So let me ask you a question while everybody's trying to figure out their strength. And I scribbled it down and I don't even remember how to do it well. But, all right, so we're going back to our ancestors. What kind of magic or lifestyle had way back then? Yeah. So we've got two sides of the coins. We've got the maternal side and the paternal side. Now, in my case, the paternal side is the UK. The other one is the USSR, Russia, somewhere, but Ukraine, so whatever. And so those are going to be very different approaches to what we're doing. So if we're thinking about that and kind of want to see which is probably best that fits, you don't have to maybe you could try to meld both of those things, but should you just kind of get the feeling, you probably will get the feeling for one more than the other, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I refer to my practice as syncretic ancestral because I am putting my own Scandinavian, Germanic, and Slavic roots together. And I have put them together. They actually fit really well. There's such a commonality between them. And yes, if you want to follow a very specific path, that's fine. I have put them together because my family is like that. They've always had foods and practices from all of our families. So I'm very comfortable, doing a Slavic spell or having a motanka, which is a Ukrainian doll, as well as doing, rune work. So I think that's fine because it's within your family. It kind of completely flies in the face of what people are concerned about as far as appropriation because it's coming from within your family. The other interesting thing is a lot of people are unaware that Celtic people originated around the Italian-Austrian Alps. And the Celts then migrated. So if you're really interested in the Celtic portion of your UK practice, you will be quite startled to note that places like Czechia have an annual bagpipe festival when they call the ancestors home.
Nice.
And that is a fact. So there's a lot more commonality, I think, than people realize. And yes, you're absolutely correct, Marla. If you gravitate more naturally to one than the other, by all means.
There you go. All right. We're going to take a break. So everybody stay put, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
If you're looking for a truly unique podcast experience, we have you covered. Spirit Bayou with CJ Dunham airs live from the Third Coast in Southeast Texas on Tuesday and Fridays at midnight Eastern Time, covering Creole folklore and folk magic to strange paranormal activity to new equipment for the field. CJ Dunham is a Catholic swamp witch, a devotee to our Mother Mary and the Trinity, a true believer in our Lord, the Holy Ghost, and Christ. Peace be with your spirit and the spirits by you.
Hi, it's Tori DeVito. In every family, small conversations can make a big impact. Like when my dad shared his experiences as an alcoholic.
Your honesty about that part of your life gave me a sense of integrity that I wanted to uphold in my own life.
I wanted you to know from someone who's been in recovery more than 30 years now that hard work is what creates success, not alcohol or other drugs. I said it a lot, and I'm glad you took it to heart.
Talk, they hear you. For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
Missed an episode of Stirring the Cauldron? Then be sure to check out marlabrooks.com and check out the archive. And while you're there, check out Marla's weekly Witches Oracle card reading. Explore the site to find many great resources, such as information on tarot, oracle readings, metaphysical consultations, and links to all of Marla's books. That's marlabrooks.com. Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And our teacher for this class is Monica Bodirsky, and I'm going to let you go and pick up where we left off.
Okay, thank you very much, Marla. So, we were talking a little bit about a strength and challenge for you. And the reason I'm asking you that, I'm hoping you jotted those down. Let me just give you an example. So I would call my greatest strength is being creative. And that's important to note as far as the practices go, because while it's a great asset, I'm aware that it keeps me from following a very strict linear path. So that's important to note because a lot of traditions require memorization as opposed to maybe learning through experience strictly in applied learning. And I would need to have the freedom to experiment with different spiritual methodologies, especially since I was just talking to Marla about bringing different cultural practices together. So I would need that fluidity. So right there, I might study it, but following Wicca wouldn't work for me, because there are certain rules and regulations and repetition that I'm not very good at, quite frankly. I need to feel it and speak from the heart, and let me tell you, that will never be the same twice. So it's something to keep in mind. Look at your strength. If your strength is following things in a very linear way and you like that kind of structure, you might want to follow a tradition that is very structured. And conversely, a challenge for me is time management. So this would make me at least pause to consider what kind of time commitment I have right away. So how many hours could I realistically dedicate to the study of occult and witchcraft? Nothing is keeping you from identifying as a witch or magical practitioner, regardless of initiation, as far as I'm concerned. I am not the witch police. However, without experience and using certain labels, you might have imposter syndrome set in fairly quickly. So consider your time availability as part of the time you have to study or to join a group, okay? So those strengths and challenges can really factor into how you're going to choose your practice. And let's slide right into labeling. Oh, there's a can of worms right there. So I don't mind if people call me a witch or a walker between the worlds or any number of mystical labels. I'm fine with that. It refers to both my practice and my inherited ability. So I do say witch as well as walker between the worlds. Having said that, whatever you want to call me, Saith worker is a Norse term. Hexa is Germanic, and Vidma is Russian or Ukrainian. Slavic word. There is a word and a nuanced tradition or practice in every single language for witch. So it's up to you to learn and use the one you prefer. You can call yourself whatever you like. I use witch primarily to reclaim it and a way to recontextualize it in a contemporary way, apart from the evil ideas that have followed that word. I think the more we use witch, the less power it has to horrify people. And it is something of pride for me. So let's say you settle on witch. Do you need to be a specialist? No, I don't think so. Right now, there seems to be a lot of people who want to drill down into sea witch, green witch, kitchen witch, city witch, cottage core witch, death witch. Yes, there are so many labels out there. I think take your time with that. Those terms can be very limiting. And I work with all of the elements and embrace most of the tools and practices out there for me. I wouldn't want to, paint myself into a corner that way, so to speak. So, how do you feel? Time for pens. How do you feel about labels? Do you have one? Do you think it would give you a greater sense of identity or security? Or would it feel kind of claustrophobic? And do you currently have a specific type of practice? If so, what do you call the practice?
Okay, I'm going to put my 2 cents in here. Because, we say that I hate labels for one, but as we get older, as we grow, we're not the same kind of practitioners that we were when we were in our 20s or
Yep.
our 30s. And so, the things that we have done previously don't always work out now. So that's kind of hard to label. So, I just kind of go with the thing that it's we should be eclectic. You know, there are eclectic witches that takes from here and there and see what they like, and if they don't like, they throw it away. So don't, you know, people should not think that once you decide who you are and what you are, it might not be forever. It might be a week, or it might be, 6 years or more. So what's your thought about that?
Oh, absolutely it is. And I think that's fine. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, if you want to call yourself a crystal witch right now, keep it in mind that it's okay. You have the right to reinvent yourself as frequently as you like. You may not even be interested in metaphysical practices or witchcraft after a while, and that's okay too. So absolutely, don't feel that you're going to get stuck. But I will tell you, some people will offer you labels, and you may wish to respond with how you see yourself. And if it's important to you, by all means take one. If you find it's totally unnecessary, same goes. Don't bother at all. It won't affect your practice, and that's up to you entirely. Mm-hmm. I think I agree with you on that. I mean, I've changed mostly by adding things to my practice, and I don't consider myself eclectic because my practices are all cultural, so I consider them syncretic because they are mine, whereas eclectic tends to mean whatever you want to try or do, which is perfectly fine, but I've sort of settled on a mix of my own, family. Yeah. I think if you want to list a few of your favorite metaphysical tools or your specialties, what would those 3 things be if they came to mind? Would they be things like herbalism, crystals, spellcasting? Where would you land with your favorite topics? Now, I asked this at the beginning, but I still want you to think about that because they aren't necessarily part of every practice if you are considering a specific tradition. All right? Okay, so I'm going to go right into tools, goodness knows. Here are a few of the tools I think we should all consider. They're not necessary, but they will help you, I think, on whatever practice you choose. So if you have a journal, a grimoire, a book of shadows for recipes and reference material and your spells, if you want to do spell casting, I think that's wonderful. It's a great way to keep everything together. Also, something called a book of mirrors, which is for reflections and journaling. I suggest that because often people put them together and then they can't find anything. It's strictly a form of organization. If you want to use cue cards or index cards or keep it all on your computer, it doesn't matter. I know a lot of people keep a book of shadows that is a word in their word processor, and that's perfectly fine. I think however you organize your information so that you can find it again is the most critical thing, okay? Also, having a book of correspondences, which is understanding how things work together. So if you are trying to find ingredients for a protection spell, then you might see the herb, the planet, the day of the week, a specific deity. There are a lot of different books of correspondences, and basically they are lists of ingredients for specific outcomes and purposes. Okay? Also, understanding sigils and symbols, you might want to look into it. You don't, again, have to memorize things, but they are part of most witchcraft practices, whether it's a veve in the practice of voodoo, Icelandic magical staves or sigils, or runes. Those are all symbols, okay, magical symbols. There's a witch's alphabet, the Theban alphabet. There are lots of different things that are out there, and you may be interested in them. You want some form of chart or app. Goodness knows there's an app for that and everything. And I have one for moon phases, so I can keep track of those because I follow moon phases fairly closely in my own practice. It's very handy. Planetary timing and tables. You might consider learning about energetic boundaries before getting into things too heavily so that you can stay safe and not take on other people's stuff, especially, as I mentioned, if you're a very empathetic person, that may be a particular concern to you. You know, the kind of person who walks into a room and can immediately feel everyone else's stuff. If you work on those energetic boundaries, that will not bother you so much, and it does take some practice. I'd like you to jot down that if you've ever had an instance of feeling bad energy directed at you, or if you just picked it up, jot down if that's happened to you. Okay?
And while they're jotting down, I have a question from the chat room.
Yeah.
And it's very long, so I'm going to start.
Sure.
She said, one day while working on the computer, the work I was doing had nothing to do with the craft. However, out of nowhere in my mind, I was visited by quite a few ancestors telling me how happy they were with the spiritual work I was doing, and I will be following and carrying on the traditions of the family. I did not recognize them, but they all seemed to know me. This is where my weakness comes in, believing in what I had just experienced. They told me a few things I would be doing, so I decided to believe that had happened and notice the things that they told me to come true. So I work on trusting myself. Any tips on how to trust better?
Wow. Well, you just exactly did the way I learned to trust those feelings, which is seeing those things that I've been told are going to happen. That is the way to do that, is to pay attention to signs and any symbols you see, or listen if you think that you're receiving that message, and jot it down and date it, because sometimes patterns are the way that we develop that. If I've had a dream, I will make note of the dream, and then I often will see within the day that occur. So now I know when I have that dream, it's likely, I trust my gut that through experience that that's going to happen within the day. So you did a great thing there by listening. What I would suggest is the way to tell whether those are actual ancestors would not be recognizing, because when we talk of ancestors, it can be so many generations back, we wouldn't recognize anybody. But it's the feeling. Often pay attention to your body and your body reactions. If you feel a sense of comfort or warmth, often that is my indicator, and I think for a lot of people that they are ancestral. And if you feel creeped out and just uncomfortable or get that weird chill, there's a lot of trickster spirits out there. I wouldn't necessarily listen. So trust your gut. It sounds like you're doing really great so far, so congratulations. Just keep doing that, and every time it proves correct, you'll be trusting yourself more and more.
That makes good sense. And I have a comment, which I started to laugh. Somebody said, if I were a witch, I'd be an alien witch. And that sounds really wrong on so many levels.
Does it though?
At first, it did for a minute, because I know who it is, and I know her. So I got it. But yeah, if you have any thoughts about that, you can talk about it.
Well, are we tongue in cheek, or are we actually talking about potential interplanetary genetics?
with her, it would be probably 50-50.
Yeah, I have a very open mind when it comes to those things. I think many of us have witnessed things that go far beyond our comprehension in the sky. And I would just say it's entirely possible. And I don't think that's in the least bit unusual. How you want to approach that, though, given how most people feel in society, is entirely up to you. But I'm very open-minded that way. I know, as I said, there's so many different planets and potential for beings and portals that we know nothing about. Even quantum physics, that's not even coming close. So more power to you, alien witch. My hat goes off to you.
I think you know her, but I'll tell you later.
Okay.
Just think Schiffer, okay? Just think
Yeah,
Schiffer.
I got a picture because being intuitive that way, I totally got that. I totally got that. Well, we could probably start our own coven of alien witches, my friend. Okay.
All right, I got another question, and we're kind of
Sure.
getting bad.
Sure.
She said her heritage is mostly Celtic,
Yeah.
and I have always been drawn to their ancient symbolism. I have 4 tattoos, Celtic in nature. Is that a sign that my ancestral past? Is that a sign that it's my ancestral past and that I recognize my ancestors and their beliefs?
I would say there's a good chance there. Yes, absolutely, if you're drawn to it. For sure. You know what's interesting about Celts, again, not just that they originated around the Italian Alps and Austria, and that they traveled northbound and southbound through Brittany, in France and into Ireland, and also overland north route through the Czech Republic or Czechia now, all the way over to Scotland. But that Celt was a terminology for any person who wanted to follow that belief system. It wasn't genetic. It was communal. So I'm not that surprised that so many people, myself included, are drawn to a great deal of Celtic practices. There are traditional Irish practitioners who will stop you at the door because they're very regional and specific practices we should be mindful and respectful of. But broadly speaking, it sounds to me like you're on the right path, and I'm sure if you're drawn to it that you should trust your gut in that regard.
Okay, we've got like 2 minutes if you want to kind of close out what we were talking about, but then I want you to tell everybody about your website, what they're going to find there, because there's tons of things, and yeah, go for it.
Sure thing. So, listen, as far as bad energy being directed, not to leave you dangling there, my advice is to wear protective talismans. Keep your home physically clean as well as spiritually. You can cleanse with sprays, washes, incense, and sound. And believe me, witches have wind chimes for a reason. They are excellent because they keep sound and air moving. You'll find community online and in real life. Festivals and craft markets are a great way to find folks. And don't dismiss information shared by older witches by saying it's outdated. I am older and well aware of where I may be outdated and what I share and what I keep up to date on, as much as I listen to young people. So across the generations is vital, all right? So get your witch on, enjoy, start your mystical practice, have an altar, collect things, have fun. I think the most important part of practice is practicing. Often people leave their witchery for evenings or weekends or a gathering, but the best thing to do so that you improve and live a truly magical life is to integrate all of the things you learn by doing them and living them, okay? You can do these things at work. You can turn your household chore into a spell. When I sweep, I do more than physical cleaning, let me tell you. It's energetic. So, I hope this class answered some of your concerns or inspires you to pursue some of your studies. Remember, we have a fall witchcraft session coming up online at Obsidian. You can visit my website for more information. It is monicabodirsky.com, Bodirsky. And that is also my Instagram, Monica Bodirsky, and you can find me on YouTube at Monica Bodirsky Shadowland. So, there you go. Thank you so much for having me on, Marla.
Oh, it's a joy. But I have one quick question because I was nosing around on your website.
Good.
Well, yeah, I have to do that. And I wanted to. So what are the Witching Wednesdays?
Witching Wednesdays came out of our coven. I had a teaching coven for 10 years, and we gathered on Wednesday evenings, and we called it Witching Wednesdays when we went out to our favorite bakery and bistro, and we opened it up to the community. So everyone was welcome to join us and introduce themselves so that there was a point of contact. Since then, and over the years, it's morphed into a once-a-month open gathering via Zoom. So anyone from around the world can join depending on their time. And we get together and I have guests. We talk about witchy topics. We just talk about whatever comes up, and sometimes I have specific topics and guests that are within the practice from all over the world. Coming up next Wednesday, actually, we have Shasta McCoy, and she's going to be talking about plant allies. It should be very fascinating.
Oh, I love that. So they just go to your website and there's a link on there to join the Zoom thing, or how do they get in there? Because I know you have to send them something.
Yeah, I do send the link out to people because sometimes we get guests we don't necessarily want. So rather than post it publicly, I ask people to send me an email to monica.bodirsky@gmail.com, and I will gladly give you a link and invite you all to join.
That sounds like fun. You can bring your own snacks or beverages, and and the best part is you don't have to share with anybody because they all have their own.
Exactly, and it's very low stress. It's very low stress. If you don't feel like talking, you don't have to. You can just hang out with other witchy folk.
That's good. That's really, really good. Because when I looked at that, I said, oh my God, this sounds like something that people need, kind of a thing to kick your shoes off and just breathe and be happy and, not have to listen to the news or anything else like that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, one of these days you should come back and teach another class, and, it's up to you what you would like to talk about. But in the meantime, good luck with the Obsidian Academy, getting it started. It sounds wonderful. And thank you for joining us. And it's also thank you for everybody that's listening in as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Stirring the Cauldrons Masterclass. Please join us at the same time for another great class and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2024. The Holiday Weasel by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through Incompetent.